The county government of Siaya has received the two reports, one on the risk assessment, as you've been told by the commissioner, and the other one is on the guidelines. And we are grateful for the commission, not only for undertaking the review of the work they had undertaken in coming out with the risk assessment and giving us the guidelines. We had a very effective, candid and useful discussion, both from the point of view of the risk assessment and also on looking at the guidelines. The guidelines, I think, are important in undertaking the preventive exercise, as has been explained by the commissioner. At the county level, I am supposed to be the chairman of that committee established at the county level. It cascades to the sub-counties, and best practices, I understand, will require us even to go lower to the wards. The exercise, I think, is useful. As you know, the Constitution requires accountability and transparency, and all this goes towards making sure that public resources and public property or assets are protected and safeguarded and optimally used for the benefit of the taxpayer and the public whom we serve. It is important in this engagement that we have a dialogue and a conversation on how to prevent corruption or deal with it. And it's also important that on ethical matters, we also read from the same script. You'll find that in the report has been highlighted by the commissioner that most of the work that they've done deals with areas where the county as a government, and speaking both for the executive and the assembly, where there are possible loopholes, if I may call them so, and what the risks, the possible risks that the public and the institutions are likely to suffer. And the commission has gone ahead to give their recommendations, and we intend to consider those recommendations. And part of this exercise would require of us as a county government to provide a work plan in terms of implementation and dealing with the report. We actually were with the view that some of the issues that have been raised, we already have addressed some of those recommendations, as it were. And this I say because of the engagement that we've had with the Parliament, specifically the Senate, touching on same issues, the engagement we have had with the controller of budget, and the engagement that we have had with the Auditor General. But in saying that, I must add quickly that the engagement of the Commission at this point in time is not so much finding out what has gone wrong or what is wrong for the sake of it, but I think the exercise is to ensure that now and in the future, those loopholes do not exist, or those loopholes are eliminated so that there are no risks and no actual losses to resources and even damage to public property and assets.
Siaya is one of the 6 counties that have been selected as pilots to establish corruption prevention committees. And so the guidelines help them to operationalize, to begin to actually put it in place. So we've had very important discussions over these 2 documents. The corruption risk assessment report looked at various functions of the executive as well as the county assembly. Basically, what that assessment did was to do an in-depth review of the systems, processes, and procedures to be able to identify uh, possible weaknesses or loopholes that may give rise to corrupt practices or unethical conduct. But the assessment also looked and acknowledged areas of improvement, areas of strength in those systems, processes, and procedures. I would like to emphasize that the corruption risk assessment is not an investigation. It's not even an audit. It is intended to be able to identify vulnerabilities, those loopholes that can be exploited by unscrupulous people to perpetrate misconduct or to perpetrate corrupt practices. So it is important to understand it in that context. And the recommendations that came out of the corruption risk assessment are intended really to strengthen those systems, processes, and procedures so that going forward, those weaknesses that may have been identified can be sealed to ensure that there is a strong governance structure both at the executive level and also within the county assembly. Now, we are doing this as part of the ongoing engagement between the commission and the county governments, as well as other ministries, departments, and agencies throughout the country, with the whole sole purpose of strengthening systems and procedures to make sure that we can actually prevent corruption from taking place in the first place. It's more proactive rather than reacting to cases of corruption. It doesn't mean that if we come across circumstances which actually indicate that corrupt practices have taken place, it doesn't mean that we will stop at that. We will make sure that we go to the extent that is permissible based on the mandate of the commission. But for this particular exercise, the idea was basically to be able to work together with the county government to address any possible risk that may exist in their systems, procedures, and processes. So that is why we came here to launch those reports. We have presented those reports to His Excellency the Governor, as well as the Speaker of the County Assembly. And the CPC guidelines are also very important because they deal with the composition, the mandate, and the responsibilities of the corruption prevention committees. And these are being piloted, as I mentioned, in the first 6 counties, which include Siaya, Vihiga, Kakamega, Elgeyo Marakwet, Kisumu, and I think those are the 6 ones that we identified. And this is also being supported by our development partners, the GIZ, who are actually helping through their good governance program to make sure that we are able to put in place mechanisms that strengthen governance and therefore preventing corruption from taking place. We've made several recommendations in areas to do with payroll management, supply chain management, financial management, assets management, where we looked at issues to do with land ownership and in some cases where perhaps some land may have been grabbed, this kind of thing. So project management as well. So we've had a lot of issues that have been identified, and these have been included in the report and communicated to the executive as well as the assembly. So there have been we have to separate 2 situations here. We've had investigations which have been conducted, okay? And the investigations have, of course, looked at some of those issues that you're talking about. And as you know, investigations take time. We are not, as a commission, we're not in the business of arresting people to help with the investigations. We make sure that the investigations are thorough to avoid situations where people are wrongly indicted. Now, where we are with the investigations, they are actually at a very, very advanced stage as we are speaking right now. I do not want to get into the details, but we are very much advanced. I think we are looking at the tail end of the investigative process, which has been undertaken in Siaya. So just be patient, because very soon you will get to hear or to see the actions that are being taken. But remember, the commission investigates. After the investigations, once we are satisfied that we have enough information, then the files are sent to the ODPP. We do not prosecute. Bear this in mind. The commission does not prosecute. And there might be back and forth between the commission and also the ODPP to make sure that any charges that are preferred against culprits can actually stand scrutiny in the court of law, because we do not want to take cases to court which can easily be trashed. So that's all I can say about the investigations that have been conducted in Siaya. But the corruption risk assessment, is done irrespective of the investigations that have been taken. And again, the objective is to strengthen systems and procedures so that next time we do not have to talk about billions that have been, misappropriated. And the idea is to prevent investigation from taking place in the first place. Okay.
It is a challenge, because sometimes when recommendations are made or when we identify gaps as the top leadership, allow me to say the politicians, the policymakers, we look at you and when they read something, we are like, where were you, the administration? So therefore, we all have a duty not just to listen, but to listen carefully and to implement so that we can plan. EACC, for a minute, I've always thought in the people's minds, even the prevention, they think is enforcement. Like newspaper, the Daily Nation adversely reports about an institution today, when yesterday they came asking for space. So the institution says, sitakupatia kazi tena, kwa sababu jana nimekupatia space 3 pages, lakini leo unaandika kitu mbaya juu ya county. You are the same, because I know you are 2 categories. One arm of you is the prevention. The prevention team, I am convinced or persuaded to believe that what excites you is when there's zero tolerance, when there's 0 cases reported about corruption in the institutions. You may not want to admit, but you know that the enforcement team, what excites them most is when a suspect is frog-marched, preferably from his bedroom, at the full glare of the media, and is a suspect, and arraigned in court, charged. Whether acquitted or convicted is none of their business, much as they would celebrate conviction. But for you, it is different. I know even here, some of us will ask you, you are not doing enough with cases that were reported to you, but it wasn't you, perhaps the commissioner, but the commissioner is not an implementer. So you sit at a place where you are one wing wants compliance and wants us to get it right. Another arm wants the drama. The deputy regional manager, you want both the drama and prevention. That is what we would want. But again, we appreciate that.
And in primary demands, Siaya continues to ensure that briberies are demanded. The public officers in Siaya demand bribes at least every time a service seeker comes to seek a service. That is what our survey says, and that's what the resident of Siaya said at that time. But there's one thing called demand and there's another thing called payment. For every demand that is made, there's a payment. So we need to be tracking that together in the next survey and how we can work on it. Then there's the average bribe that is paid. You need to be demanded and it is paid. The national average bribe, if you leave Siaya, is about Kenya shillings 5,880. So you can understand the magnitude of the problem, which we call systemic. But in Siaya, it is 2,619. So slightly below the national. So Siaya is not in the top 10 or in the bottom 10, but it's there in between. That was about 2-3 years ago. Now we look at the indicators which will be released later towards the end of this year.
Those for water, environment resources, and land, physical planning, housing, and urban development did not provide the exact fees and levies for services provided by respective departments. This may lead to misinformation of the member of the public, and it's a loophole. Now, the other finding on the area of interest management was that the county executive had unsurrendered interest amounting to Kenya shillings 661,886,378 at the time of the assessment in February. Now, we have given a breakdown in 2019-2020. We have started 2023 financial year. At the time of the assessment in February, the balance that had not been surrendered was Kenya million 36,235,257. All these totals is 1,886,78. Now, failure to ensure that the interests are surrendered on time is a weakness that may lead to loss of public funds. And we advise the county executive to ensure that all the unsurrendered interests are recovered from the use of default notices with an excess of the prevailing central bank rate as provided in the regulations. Implementing the recommendations of the internal auditors in a timely manner. And this may lead to perpetration of malpractice of the county executive in the continuous process. So we advise the county executive to develop comprehensive action plans for implementation of the internal recommendations.
And that there are areas we have done well, and there are a number of areas we also need to pull up our socks. And I think it's a good report. We will have time to discuss it. But before we get there,